If you grew up with a sibling who was universally acknowledged as the center of the universe, you already know the taste of the particular brand of poison I was force-fed my entire life. My older sister, Chloe, was the golden child. I don't mean that in the casual, exaggerated way people use on the internet to describe a sibling who got a slightly better car for their 16th birthday. I mean it in the pathological, deeply ingrained, inescapable reality of our family dynamic. Chloe was born 3 years before me, and from the moment she drew breath, my parents treated her like the second coming of royalty. I was just the spare, the afterthought, the audience member permanently relegated to the back row, expected to clap until my hands bled for every minor milestone she achieved. When I was 8, I saved up my allowance for 6 months to buy a specific, ridiculously overpriced porcelain doll. The day I finally brought it home, Chloe decided she wanted it. My mother didn't even hesitate. She pried it from my hands, handed it to a grinning Chloe, and told me, "You're younger, Maya. You need to learn to share. Your sister appreciates the aesthetic more anyway." That was the word they always used for Chloe, aesthetic. She was delicate, blonde, and possessed a natural, manipulative charisma that made adults melt. I was brunette, quiet, and possessed a spine that was constantly being bent by the weight of their expectations. This dynamic didn't fade as we grew older, it metastasized. If I got a B on a math test, it was a crisis requiring a tutor. If Chloe failed a class, the teacher was clearly incompetent and intimidated by her creative genius. When I got accepted into my first-choice university, the celebration dinner was derailed because Chloe casually announced she had decided to take a gap year to find herself in Europe, and naturally, my parents needed to immediately draft a budget for her backpacking trip. I ate my celebratory cake in silence. I learned early on that the only way to survive was to build my own life completely separate from the gravitational pull of my family. I moved across the country, threw myself into my career, and built walls so high and thick that not even my mother's guilt trips could penetrate them. I became an event planner. It wasn't just a job, it was a calling. I spent my 20s orchestrating other people's joy, managing chaos, and turning abstract dreams into tangible, breathtaking realities. I started from the absolute bottom, fetching coffee for tyrannical senior planners and steaming $100,000 silk tablecloths at 3 in the morning. But I was good at it. I was hyper-organized, ruthlessly efficient, and I had an eye for design that eventually caught the attention of high-net-worth clients. By the time I was 28, I wasn't just an event planner. I was the event planner for a very specific, very wealthy echelon of society. I had my own boutique firm, a roster of exclusive vendors who would walk through fire for me, and a reputation for pulling off the impossible. And then, I met Leo. Leo was an architect, a man who understood structure and foundation, both in buildings and in life. He was patient, kind, and completely immune to the toxic circus that was my family. When I introduced him to them at a forced Thanksgiving dinner, Chloe immediately tried her usual routine, flirting aggressively, subtly putting me down, and dominating the conversation with tales of her latest passion project, which, at the time, was a holistic dog yoga business that my parents were heavily funding. Leo just politely smiled, squeezed my hand under the table, and later told me on the drive home, "Your sister is exhausting, and your parents are blind. I love you." That was the moment I knew I was going to marry him. His proposal was everything I had ever wanted. It wasn't a public spectacle or a grand, performative gesture. It was just the two of us, on the rooftop of the first apartment we shared, surrounded by fairy lights and the quiet hum of the city below. He gave me a vintage Art Deco ring that he had spent months tracking down because he knew I hated modern cuts. For the first time in my life, I felt completely, overwhelmingly prioritized. I was the center of someone's universe, and it felt incredible. Naturally, as an elite event planner, the prospect of planning my own wedding was intoxicating. This was my magnum opus. For years, I had poured my heart, soul, and creative energy into executing other people's visions. I had negotiated with florists to import rare orchids from Japan for a tech billionaire's daughter. I had convinced a notoriously reclusive Michelin star chef to cater a bohemian woodland wedding. I had performed miracles on a weekly basis. Now, it was my turn. Every connection I had forged, every favor I had banked, every industry secret I had hoarded was going to be deployed for my own special day. I didn't want a massive, bloated affair. I wanted an intimate, insanely high-end, perfectly curated experience for our closest friends and the very few family members I could tolerate. The centerpiece of my vision was the venue. The glass conservatory at the historic Bellerose estate. It was a legendary location, a sprawling 19th-century botanical marvel made entirely of wrought iron and antique glass, situated on 50 acres of private, manicured gardens. The waitlist for the Bellerose was notoriously 5 years long. They didn't even advertise, they didn't need to. But the estate manager, a wonderful, terrifying woman named Eleanor, owed me a massive favor after I saved her from a catastrophic double-booking disaster 3 years prior. When I called Eleanor and told her I was engaged, she bypassed the waitlist entirely and gave me the prime date of September 14th. Next was the catering. I bypassed the standard wedding factories and went straight to Chef Julian Thorne. Julian was a culinary genius who usually refused to do weddings because he hated the lack of control. But Julian and I had a mutual respect born from surviving a disastrous corporate gala where the power went out, and we managed to serve a flawless 5-course meal using only camp stoves and sheer willpower. For my wedding, he agreed to design a bespoke menu: heirloom tomato tartlets with goat cheese foam, seared diver scallops with a sweet corn puree, and a main course of Wagyu beef cheek braised in a 1990 Barolo. For the florals, I brought in Botanica Obscura, a highly sought-after floral design studio run by an eccentric duo who specialized in structural, avant-garde arrangements. We spent hours in their studio, sketching out a vision of suspended floral clouds, cascading amaranth, and hundreds of tapered candles that would make the glass conservatory look like a midnight fairy forest. Because I was a professional, and because the wedding industry is notoriously cutthroat regarding deposits and liability, I booked everything through my corporate agency account. This was a standard practice for me. When I planned events for high-profile clients who required anonymity, I would secure the venues and vendors under my company's name, Aura Events, utilizing our corporate master contracts and insurance policies. This offered me immense leverage and financial security, as vendors were contractually bound to my agency rather than the individual client. I paid the initial deposits, which amounted to nearly $40,000 of my own hard-earned savings, and settled back to enjoy the agonizingly long, but thrilling, year of anticipation. I made the fatal mistake of letting my joy spill over. I thought, perhaps foolishly, that maybe this once, my family could just be happy for me. I brought my mother and Chloe to one of my dress fittings. It was a massive error in judgment. I had chosen a sleek, modern architectural gown that perfectly matched my style. When I stepped out of the dressing room, expecting a motherly tear or at least a compliment, my mother just pursed her lips. "It's very plain, isn't it, Maya?" she said, tilting her head. "It looks a bit like a nightgown, don't you think, Chloe?" Chloe, who was currently draped over a velvet sofa scrolling through her phone, barely looked up. "It's very you, Maya, very safe, very background." I swallowed the lump in my throat, paid for the dress, and didn't invite them to any other wedding-related appointments. But the damage was done. Chloe had seen the spark in my eye. She had seen that I was doing something spectacular, something that was entirely mine, and something that didn't involve her. That, to a golden child, is an act of war. 3 months after my engagement, the bomb dropped. My parents called a mandatory family dinner at an absurdly expensive restaurant, claiming they had magnificent news. Leo and I arrived, already bracing ourselves for whatever fresh hell this was. We found my parents beaming like they had just won the lottery, and Chloe sitting there with a massive, ostentatious, slightly gaudy diamond ring on her finger. Sitting next to her was Todd. Todd was fine. He was a regional manager for a mid-tier logistics company. He was aggressively beige. He liked golf, he drove a leased luxury sedan, and his entire personality seemed to consist of agreeing with whatever Chloe said. They had been dating for barely 6 months. "We're engaged," Chloe shrieked, thrusting her hand into the center of the table, nearly knocking over my water glass. Todd proposed in Aspen. It was magical. My parents clapped enthusiastically. My mother was already crying. My baby girl, she wept. This is the happiest day of my life. I forced a smile, congratulated them, and kicked Leo under the table so he wouldn't say anything sarcastic. I genuinely didn't care that Chloe was engaged. I wasn't competing with her. But then, dessert arrived, and Chloe dropped the second bomb. So, she said, cutting into a slice of cheesecake, Todd and I have been talking, and we just can't wait to start our lives together. We don't want a long, drawn-out engagement. We want to get married this year. In fact, we want a summer wedding. August. The table went silent. My wedding was in September. August, I repeated, my voice tight. Chloe, that's incredibly fast, and that's a month before my wedding. Chloe rolled her eyes, offering me a patronizing smile. Oh, Maya, don't be like that. It's not a competition. Besides, you've been engaged for ages. Todd and I just have a more passionate timeline. And honestly, it works out perfectly. All the out-of-town family can just come for my wedding, and if they can't afford to fly back out for yours a month later, well, yours was going to be small anyway, right? The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. She was blatantly trying to eclipse my wedding, to steal my thunder, to ensure that the family's financial and emotional resources were entirely depleted by the time my day rolled around. My mother immediately chimed in to defend her. Maya, please don't be selfish, my mother scolded. Your sister has found her soulmate. You should be thrilled for her. We are going to be very busy planning a wedding in 4 months, so I hope you have your little event mostly sorted out. My little event is fully planned, Mother, I said coldly. And it's completely fine, I don't need your help. I thought that was the end of it. I thought she was just going to rush a tacky, thrown-together wedding at a country club, demand all my parents' money, and leave me in peace. I severely underestimated the depths of Chloe's entitlement and the twisted mechanics of her jealousy. She didn't just want to get married before me, she wanted what I had. She wanted the prestige, the exclusivity, the perfection that she knew I had cultivated. And she decided that because she was the golden child, she simply had a right to take it. The realization of what she had done didn't hit me all at once. It came in a slow, sickening trickle of confusing emails and odd phone calls. It started in late May, about 3 months before her supposed wedding and 4 months before mine. I was in my home office, reviewing a seating chart for a corporate client, when my phone rang. It was Julian, my Michelin star caterer. Maya, darling, Julian's crisp, slightly frantic voice came through the speaker. I'm looking over the revised menu requests for the Bella Rose event, and I have to admit, I'm utterly baffled. You want to replace the Wagyu beef cheek with a mac and cheese bar, and the scallop puree with deep-fried ravioli. Have you suffered a head injury? I froze, my pen hovering over the paper. Julian, what are you talking about? I haven't sent any revised menu requests. The menu is locked. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Maya, I received an email yesterday from your account. Well, not your agency account, a personal Gmail. It said you were transferring the primary contact to your sister, Chloe, as she was helping you manage the final details. The email instructed me to take all future culinary direction from her. And then, an hour ago, Chloe called me. She told me the September date was being moved up to August 12th due to a family emergency, and she completely overhauled the menu. The blood drained from my face. My heart began to pound a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. Julian, read me the email address. He read it out. It was a slight variation of my name, an old email address I hadn't used since college, but one that Chloe definitely knew. Julian, do not change the menu, I said, my voice eerily calm despite the hurricane of panic in my chest. Do not speak to Chloe again. I will call you back. I hung up and immediately called a leaner at the Bella Rose estate. My hands were shaking so violently, I dropped my phone twice before I managed to hit dial. Leaner, it's Maya, I said the second she answered. Please tell me you haven't changed my booking. Leaner sounded confused and a little defensive. Maya, we processed the date change and the name transfer 2 weeks ago. Just like you authorized in the paperwork your sister dropped off. I never authorized a date change. And I certainly never transferred the booking. I practically screamed. Maya, calm down. Eleanor said, her professional tone hardening. Your sister, Chloe, came into the office. She had a signed authorization form on your company letterhead, stating that, due to unforeseen personal circumstances, the September 14th reservation under Aura Events was being formally transferred to Chloe as the primary beneficiary, and the date was being moved to August 12th, which we miraculously had an opening for after a cancellation. She paid the date change penalty fee in cash. She looked exactly like you, she had all the contract numbers, she knew all the inside details of the booking. What is going on? My vision blurred. The edges of the room began to darken. Chloe had stolen my venue. She had forged my signature on my own company letterhead, which she had easy access to when she visited my apartment to borrow clothes, and she had used our family resemblance and her inherent charm to bypass the venue's security protocols. Because the event was booked under my corporate account, Eleanor assumed it was a standard client transfer, something my agency did occasionally when high-profile dates needed shuffling. I spent the next 3 hours in a fugue state of pure, unadulterated horror, tracing the destruction. She hadn't just taken the venue and the caterer. She had called Botanica Obscura, spun a sob story about a sick relative necessitating an earlier wedding date, and hijacked my floral design, changing the elegant white and green palette to a gaudy, screaming magenta and gold. She had stolen my photographer, my string quartet, even my vintage furniture rental. She had systematically dismantled my perfect day and reassembled it into a grotesque monument to her own ego, all while pretending to be acting on my behalf. When Leo got home from work, he found me sitting on the floor of the kitchen, surrounded by printed contracts and emails, hyperventilating. It took him 20 minutes to calm me down enough to explain what had happened. When I finally finished, the look on his face shifted from concern to a cold, terrifying anger. I'm calling the police, Leo said, pulling out his phone. This is fraud. This is identity theft. We are having her arrested. No, I whispered. Leo stopped, staring at me. Maya, she stole your wedding. She forged your signature. She has hijacked nearly $80,000 worth of your vendor deposits. I know, I said, taking a deep, shuddering breath. The panic was receding, leaving behind something much colder, much harder. If we call the police, it becomes a massive legal battle. My parents will get involved. They will hire her a lawyer. They will say it was a misunderstanding, that she was just trying to help and got confused. They will drag this out for years, and my wedding will still be ruined. The vendors will be spooked, the contracts will be frozen in litigation, and I will lose everything. So what do we do? Leo asked, kneeling beside me. We can't just let her get away with this. I looked down at the contracts scattered around me. These were my master corporate agreements. I knew every clause, every loophole, every penalty fee by heart. I wrote them. And as I stared at the signature line on the Bella Rose contract, a memory surfaced, a standard clause I included in all my high-liability vendor agreements to protect my agency from deadbeat clients. Clause 7.4. Final payment and corporate guarantee. All initial deposits are secured by Aura Events. However, for the event to proceed, final payment of the remaining balance must be authorized and processed from the primary corporate account no later than 48 hours prior to the event commencement. Failure to provide authorization will result in an immediate suspension of services. If the corporate guarantee is revoked prior to the 48-hour deadline, the individual client assumes immediate and total financial liability for the remaining balance, payable in full via certified funds, prior to setup. Chloe hadn't read the fine print. She was too busy gloating, too busy picking out magenta napkins, to understand the legal mechanics of what she had hijacked. She thought she had stolen my wedding. In reality, she had just put her name on the passenger manifest of a plane I was piloting, and I was going to fly it straight into a mountain. We don't call the police, I told Leo, a slow, dark smile spreading across my face. We let her have the wedding. The next 3 months were an exercise in psychological warfare. I had to play the part of the defeated, heartbroken sister. I called my mother, crying, and told her that there had been a terrible mix-up with my vendors, that I had lost my venue, and that Leo and I were putting our wedding on hold indefinitely. My mother's reaction was exactly what I expected. Oh, Maya, that's a shame, she said lightly, rustling papers in the background. But honestly, maybe it's for the best. Planning two weddings so close together was always going to be stressful for the family. And Chloe's wedding is taking up so much of our time. Have you seen the new floral mock-ups? She managed to get the Bella Rose estate. Can you believe her luck? Wow, I deadpanned. Amazing luck. Chloe, of course, was insufferable. She strutted around family gatherings like a conquering queen. She constantly brought up her venue, her caterer, her amazing vision. She even had the audacity to ask me for advice on seating charts, knowing full well she had stolen my blueprints. I played along. I gave her bland, unhelpful advice. I watched her blow my parents' money on ridiculous extras, a personalized fireworks display, a fleet of vintage Rolls-Royces, a custom-built champagne tower. She was spending wildly, assuming that the massive, underlying vendor balances were already handled by my initial deposits and the corporate guarantee. She didn't know that my deposits only covered 30% of the total cost. The remaining 70%, a staggering sum of over $100,000, considering the exorbitant late change fees, the rush orders, and Julian's punitive charges for changing his menu to mac and cheese, was due 48 hours before the event. As August 12th approached, I meticulously set the trap. I contacted Eliner, Julian, Botanica Obscura, and every other vendor. I didn't tell them about the forgery. I didn't need to complicate things with accusations of fraud. I simply utilized my power as the CEO of Aura Events. I formally invoked Clause 7.4. I informed them that Aura Events was officially withdrawing our corporate backing and financial guarantee for the August 12th event. I explained that the client, Chloe, had assumed full liability, and that my company's credit cards were not to be charged for the final balances. The vendors, well-versed in the ruthless nature of the event industry, didn't blink. They simply updated their billing systems. To them, Chloe was now just a desperately vulnerable bride without a corporate safety net, staring down a massive, impending invoice. 48 hours before Chloe's wedding, the automated systems did their job. Invoices were generated and sent to the primary contact email, the fake Gmail account Chloe had created to impersonate me. But Chloe, being Chloe, was too busy getting a chemical peel and arguing with her bridesmaids to check a burner email account. The morning of August 12th dawned bright, clear, and sickeningly hot. Leo and I were not attending the wedding. I had told my family I was too depressed about my own canceled wedding to watch my sister get married. They had called me selfish, dramatic, and petty, but they hadn't pushed it. They were too busy preparing for the event of the season. At 8 a.m., the vendor load-in was scheduled to begin at the Bella Rose estate. At 8:15 a.m., my phone began to buzz. I let it ring. At 8:30 a.m., it rang again. And again, and again. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat on my balcony with Leo and watched the missed calls pile up. My mother, Chloe, Todd, my father, Eliner, Julian. Finally, at 9 a.m., I answered a call from Eliner. Maya. Eliner's voice was tight with stress. We have a situation. We are refusing entry to the florists, the caterers are sitting in the parking lot refusing to unload, and the rental company is threatening to drive away. Why? I asked, taking a serene sip of my coffee. Is there a problem with the venue? You know exactly what the problem is, Maya, Eliner said, a hint of grudging respect in her voice. Your sister failed to clear the final balance at the 48-hour mark. Since you pulled your corporate guarantee, she is personally liable. We need $112,000 in certified funds or cash, immediately. We don't take personal checks for final balances on the day of the event. Your sister is currently screaming at me in the driveway in a silk bathrobe, demanding I let her in. That sounds like a terrible start to her big day, I said smoothly. But as I stated in my formal notice, Aura Events is no longer associated with that contract. Chloe is the primary, you'll have to take it up with her. Maya, she doesn't have the money, Eliner said. Your parents are trying to max out their credit cards, but our system is declining them for fraud alerts due to the size of the charges. If this balance isn't paid in the next 30 minutes, I am legally obligated to clear the property. I understand, I said. Good luck, Eliner. I hung up, 10 minutes later, Chloe called. I answered, putting her on speakerphone so Leo could hear. Maya! The shriek was so loud the phone's speaker crackled. Chloe sounded utterly unhinged. What did you do? The venue won't let us in. The caterer is leaving. They're saying I owe them $100,000. You paid for this. You booked this. I booked it for September 14th, Chloe, I said, my voice cold and hard as a diamond. Under my company's name. You forged my signature, stole my venue, and hijacked my vendors. Did you honestly think you could steal a $250,000 event and not be responsible for the bill? You have to pay it, she screamed, hysterically sobbing now. Mom and Dad's cards are declining. The guests are going to start arriving at noon. My wedding is ruined. Maya, you have to fix this. Put your corporate card back on file right now. No, I said simply. There was a stunned silence on the other end, broken only by Chloe's ragged breathing. What? No, I repeated. I'm not bailing you out. You wanted to be the bride so badly. You wanted my venue, my food, my flowers. Well, congratulations, Chloe. You got exactly what you wanted. You are the sole beneficiary of that contract. Have a beautiful wedding. Maya, please. I heard my mother's voice now, frantic and pleading in the background. Maya, you can't do this to your sister. This is family. We will pay you back, I swear, just put the card down. You let her steal from me, I told my mother, the years of repressed anger finally bubbling to the surface. You knew she took my venue, and you didn't care. You cheered her on. You don't have $100,000 to pay me back, Mom. You blew your savings on her fireworks and her dress. The answer is no. Don't ever call me again. I hung up, blocked their numbers, and turned off my phone. I later heard the details through the grapevine of my industry connections. It was a massacre. At 10 o'clock a.m., with no payment materialized, Aliner locked the gates of the Bellarose estate. Julian drove his refrigerated trucks back to the city. Botanica Obscura took their magnificent, gaudy magenta flowers and dumped them in a compactor. When the 200 guests arrived at noon in their black tie attire, they found the massive iron gates padlocked, and Chloe sitting on the curb in her $20,000 wedding dress, screaming and throwing gravel at passing cars, her makeup running down her face in black streaks. Todd, the beige fiancé, apparently spent the entire time on the phone with his mother, looking terrified. There was no food. There was no music. There was no wedding. My parents had to stand at the gates and personally turn away hundreds of angry, confused guests, humiliated beyond comprehension. The subsequent fallout destroyed my parents' finances, as the vendors successfully sued Chloe for breach of contract, and my parents had to remortgage their house to cover her legal fees and the outstanding debts she couldn't escape. Todd, witnessing the pure, unadulterated insanity of my family, broke off the engagement 2 weeks later. As for me, Leo and I didn't sit around mourning our stolen wedding. I had $40,000 in recovered deposits that the vendors returned to my corporate account as a courtesy, plus the money we had saved for our own honeymoon. 3 days after Chloe's disastrous non-wedding, Leo and I boarded a first-class flight to Paris. We didn't tell anyone. We didn't post it on social media. We just left. We stayed in a tiny, exquisite boutique hotel in Le Marais. On a crisp, beautiful Tuesday morning, wearing a simple, elegant vintage silk dress I bought at a local boutique, I stood on a private balcony overlooking the Seine. The only vendor we hired was a local photographer and an officiant. We didn't have suspended